Welcome in, Braves Today, bravestoday.com. I am Ben Taylor. He is Lindsay Crosby. And Lindsay, box check, divisional title, done. Now what do we do?
That was box one of three. We collected a lot of the comments from a lot of the players after they clinched in Philly on Wednesday night. And the common theme that you can see at the piece on bravestoday.com is the job's not done yet, right? They're looking at the next step is to secure home field advantage. And then after that, it's to get to and win the World Series. Atlanta needs to win 8 more games before the end of the season to lock up, to confirm home field advantage all the way through the NLCS. So the magic number on that is 8. Any Braves win lowers the number. Any Dodgers loss lowers the number. The Braves also need 13. The magic number is 13 for home field advantage in the World Series. And that is, as of right now, any Orioles loss lowers that number, as well as any Braves win lowers that number. So they understand, they are not done. They enjoyed winning the East. They celebrated it. But today, as of Friday, back to work, because the goal now is to make and win the World Series.
I got asked the other day, that was you brought up a very good point right there with home field advantage as far as the World Series is concerned. That is not determined by the All-Star game anymore. I know that some people were asking that, and I'm not sure what year that went away, but I know that's not a thing now. It's doing overall rank, and I like the way it is now. I don't like the All-Star game because, well, let's face it, this past All-Star game, Braves had 2 pitchers that they wouldn't allow to throw. So if those 2 pitchers throw, that could have made a difference in the game.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you want it to be decided by something you have control over, right? You have control over how you play throughout the course of the season. You don't have control over how the All-Star game goes. So find a different way to compensate those guys. But the players have talked about having home field advantage. If nothing else, they wouldn't have gotten past the Dodgers if they didn't have home field advantage. The Braves won one of the 3 games they played out in LA, but because they won both games at home to start that series, they were up 3-1 when they came back to Atlanta and only had to win one more game. And of course, they lost Game 5 and then won Game 6 and went to the World Series. So they have talked about if they don't have home field advantage, they probably don't make the World Series. So they understand how important it is, and they are going out to get it.
And that includes, I mean, not to count the chickens before they hatch, but it looks like we're on a collision course as Braves fans to see another Braves-Dodgers series just because of the way both of them are playing right now, the way both of them are pitching right now. That Philly could throw a wrench in the works in that before it's all said and done with. I hate to say that because that would come at the demise of the Braves more than likely. But I will say that Atlanta does not generally do well in LA, even though people may have some recency bias of how well they did as of late.
Yeah, they did well in that series this year, but that was something that I think they were 1-10 in LA before that series in recent history. So, this is a different Braves team. That's a different Dodgers team, but you want home field advantage. And the Braves have talked about, having the home crowd behind them obviously helps them. But then also the way that the Braves are structured from a business perspective, Alex Anthopoulos can spend the money that the team makes, right? They don't have an owner who can come out of pocket and give them extra money to extend payroll. So any home games that you get in the postseason, that money goes back to the Atlanta Braves. And so Atlanta fans are one of the few teams where you can think every dollar I spend in the Battery, at the ballpark, and in the postseason directly helps this team increase payroll, re-sign my favorite players, and makes the team better. So if nothing else, from a business perspective, getting home field is really important, as well as from a competitive on the field perspective.
Oh, what an electric atmosphere, too, to be around playoff baseball in Atlanta. It's unbelievable. So, Ronald Acuña Jr., we're going to get the 40-70, or is there going to be some load management, or is it one of those things? And I asked this the other day to Kyle, who jumped on the pod with me. Do we see people like Ronald and Matt Olson get 2 ABs and then sit the bench the rest of the game?
So what Snitker's kind of done with those guys is he's tried to find different ways to give them a break. Ronald Acuña Jr., that doubleheader they had in Philly, Game 2, he was the DH, not playing right field. I wouldn't be surprised if Snitker tries to find a couple ways to keep them in the lineup, but doesn't necessarily have them doing the full job of playing in the field. But Ronald Acuña Jr., 37 home runs, 66 stolen bases. He needs 3 homers. He needs 4 stolen bases to hit 40-70. It feels like that's probably going to happen. That's a small enough thing you need where one big series, one big game could get you there. And so if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, when September started, is Ronald going to hit 40 home runs? I don't think I would have said yes, because he was sitting maybe, I think, at 30 or 29 or 30, 29, 30, 31. But now I think he will. And for Matt Olson, it really feels like he's going to hit the statistical marks because, face it, playing first base isn't as hard physically as it is playing outfield. And so you're not really going to bench him unless he says he wants a day off.
Yeah, and who knows if he does. He hasn't had one this year, so it'd be curious to see how that is handled, and Snedeker may put it in the hands of someone like him. I don't think Ronald's going to have a choice as far as being in his hands, but like you said, maybe more of a DH role and not necessarily out in the field. Pitching rotations, kind of the same deal there. Now, the good news is some guys are going to get a little bit more rest because it seems like Wright is up and up for good now. And so you'll have Kyle Wright that'll be in the rotation. But other than that, do we see any mix-ups? Do we see any changes? Do we see any bullpen games? Anything to rest arms to close out this season?
So that's something where I think you're going to see kind of what Atlanta's done right now, what they tried to do last weekend or 2 weekends ago with Darius Vines. They've called up Jared Schuster right now. They have a TBD in the schedule. Mm-hmm. Since you get an extra pitcher in the bullpen, it really feels like the goal is we'll bring up a starter. If we don't need him, we'll let him take a start and we'll push a guy back. And so I would expect him, if he doesn't get used tonight, to be the starter on Saturday. And then Jake Mastriani wrote a great piece for us about some of the ways Atlanta can adjust the rotation a bit so that you can save Fried and Strider for when you play Philly next week. You don't have to have those two guys face the Phillies, since you're either going to face them or the Cubs in the NLDS. You don't give Philadelphia more than one look at either pitcher in the late part of the season. So I think we'll see Atlanta probably try to maybe do a bullpen thing, throw some of those fifth guys like a Schuster or a Wright, and then try to find ways to keep Fried and Strider away from Philly, just so those guys are, one, lined up for the postseason, but then two, the Phillies don't have too many chances to look at them.
People have talked about when the playoffs roll around as far as the pitching rotation is concerned, and they've wondered if Wright is up to stay. Does he move to the bullpen and turn into like a middle reliever during the playoffs?
When I put out our postseason roster preview, that's kind of the direction that I took, is at least in the first couple series, you only need 3 starters, and that's obviously going to be Fried, Strider, and Morton. If you have a fourth, I think as of right now, that's going to be Bryce Elder based on track record and what you've seen. And Kyle Wright is, if he looks good enough in his starts over the next couple of weeks to where you feel like you can trust him, his best role is as that fourth man out of the, that long man out of the bullpen. If a starter has to leave early, he can go in and give you length. If it's a blowout game, which we've seen either direction, he can come in, save the rest of the pen, and cover multiple innings. And then if somebody has to leave the roster because of injury, you have him there. You can slide him into a starting role and then just put another reliever in the pen. So it feels like that's what's going to happen, but who knows? Kyle Wright may get back to last year's form, and he may be your fourth starter. We just don't know yet.
Yes, as I said, if he goes out and throws that no-hitter that I've been promising everybody, he probably will become that fourth starter really quickly. Give me a player that is going to make an impact down the stretch here as the season comes to an end, just because there's going to be so many movements in and out of the lineup and different things going on. Or maybe not that can make an impact, that may need to make an impact.
So looking at the bullpen, that was one of the areas when I did that roster preview, I had multiple questions about. And I think, and Brad Hand stepped up really well in that road trip last week against Philly. He got a win, he got a save, he got a hold. He did really well. And I think right now, Kirby Yates is probably that guy who's going to be big for you down the stretch. He picked up 2 saves last week in Philly. He covered extra innings on Monday, and then he was the guy on Wednesday because Iglesias and Minter had both thrown 3 straight days. But Atlanta needs to
with
find
Iglesias blowing 2 saves, by the way.
And got and got 2 wins. But yeah, it's you need that like one more guy in the bullpen to kind of step up and prove that he's a high leverage option. You have Iglesias, Minter, Jimenez are kind of your setup and closer guys there. They trust Pierce Johnson for a middle relief. They trust Brad Hand for a middle relief. But you need that guy who can come in and be your emergency guy, your emergency high level. And like I said, Yates has kind of been that guy. He was that guy last week. I think he's going to go a long way to showing like, hey, rather than putting Iglesias out there and giving him one more inning for no reason, we can throw Yates out there. He can get the save, and then he can be key for us in the postseason.
You mentioned a name. This is not part of my impact play. You mentioned a name. Somebody that's been a pleasant surprise since he's come aboard, and that is Hand. I have been pleasantly surprised. I really didn't know what we were going to get with him. As you know, anytime somebody comes from Colorado from the mound, I don't know what we're going to see. The expectations are their numbers have got to get better because they're in a launching pad out there. But you just never know until they get here and they work out. And he has been by far a pleasant surprise for me.
And him stepping up was really big with the injury to Dylan Lee.
Yes.
Because when Brad Hand first got here, it didn't necessarily look like he was going to make the postseason roster. And so the thought process was, okay, Minter's a lefty. You'll have Lee as your second lefty. But now that Lee is back on the IL, it's good that Brad Hand has stepped up to give you a second lefty reliever in your pen so that if it's a matchup thing, you don't have to go to A.J. Minter before the 8th inning or before the 7th inning to get a couple outs against a lefty. You have Brad Hand to throw out there.
My impact player is more of a position than it is a player. And I think that the only way to go right now is up, not necessarily defensively. That's been fine. But offensively, I'm going to stay with the battery as I'd love for Sean Murphy to step up a little bit. Even Travis d'Arnaud, their batting average has been less than stellar since the All-Star break.
Yeah, they've together, if I have this right, they've combined for 60 games. I think we pulled the stat before the game on Wednesday. And d'Arnaud's batted 171. Murphy's batted 183. Both of them are striking out right around 20% of the time. And Murphy's WRC plus is 82. d'Arnaud's was like 28, which was down. It's down close to Marcelo Zuna in April territory. So we need one of the catchers to get into form over the end of the post, as we get towards the postseason. We need one of them to get hot. And you've seen Snitker rotating them more often, trying to give them both at bats to see if somebody can pick it up and figure it out.
Yeah, that by far has been sort of a hole in the lineup. Like you just talked, I think the best comparison is the first half with Ozuna and how he turned it around. Now it's getting to the point where I think our catchers need to turn it around from the plate because they're still going to platoon even in the playoffs. I mean, they're still going to, not necessarily one game here, one game there. But I think, as you said, if Murphy gets hot, he's probably going to be 2 games in a row, 3 games in a row starter before you see d'Arnaud come in there maybe for a game 4, and then it may go right back to Murphy again. Kind of what we saw throughout the regular season. But d'Arnaud could win that job if he gets up there and he starts going 5 for 10 in the next couple of games. Then more than likely he'll see more of the action just because defensively it's gotten to the point it seems. I mean, Philly series, you had a couple of guys that took some bases, but anytime you start facing some of those fast guys, they're going to try to take bases anyway. But both of them defensively tend to still throw runners out. So I think right now it's who has the better bat and how can you help us out come playoff time.
Yeah, I think whoever starts hitting is going to be the guy to start the postseason unless Snitker just says we're going to go with Murphy because we think his ceiling is higher, even though they're both cold. I just think whoever gets hot first is going to be the game 1 starter in the postseason.
What I don't want to happen is I don't want Murphy to start pressing because he wants to play so badly in the postseason. And then that could totally work against him and him go 0 for the next few games. So we shall see. He is Lindsay Crosby. I am Ben Taylor. Short version, but a good version as we talk about some of the things to look forward to. Lindsay, as always, man, I greatly appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.